Our next panel is on the very important topic of gender and education. In the panel, we find Cristina Daggio, Senior Policy Analyst at UNESCO, Frances Arnold, Nobel Prize Laureate in Chemistry in 2018, and Cathy and Davidson, Founding Director of the Futures Initiative. Moderator is Carin Klaesson, Curator at Nobel Prize Outreach.
Warmly welcome Frances Arnold, Cristina Daggio, and Cathy Davidson. A pleasure to have you here, even on a screen then. Before we start our discussion on achieving gender equality in education, we will have an introduction talk from you, Cristina. So please, let's start with that one.
Good afternoon, everyone. All countries committed to inclusive education when they signed up for SDG 4, the Sustainable Development Goal 4 on education, to be achieved by 2030. It is a commitment we cannot afford to lose sight of. If anything, the case of it has become stronger over time. The message of the report is very powerful in this respect. All means all. Inclusion is for everyone and for every country. Our report has defined inclusion as a process that celebrates diversity and builds a sense of belonging to achieve social cohesion. And these actions are rooted in the belief that every person has value and potential. Besides other 9 recommendations concerning funding, for instance, and educational workforce and data, the reports call for everyone that is involved in education to widen the understanding of inclusive education and include all learners, regardless of identity, background, or ability, which still too often dictate education opportunities. It looks at inclusion considering those that are out of the school system, the 258 millions of children, youth, and adolescents, but also those million more that are alienated within and through education, like children with disabilities, girls, refugees, etc. However, this principle is not very often enshrined in laws and policies. 68% of countries considered in the report have a definition of inclusive education, and just 57% of them include all marginalized learners. Concerning girls, there has been a huge generational leap in access to education over the past 25 years. This has meant that 180 million more of girls have been enrolled in primary and secondary education. Tertiary education enrollment have risen by 3 times, and girls have caught up with boys in reading and mathematics. However, they still face the worst forms of acute exclusion. They are those that are most likely not to set a foot in the school. 9 million of girls are in this position, and they are also at more risk of experiencing illiteracy when they are adult. However, girls' education can break the cycle of disadvantage, and for each year of education achieved by mothers in the 80 cohort, each daughter has achieved 7 months more of education. Progress towards gender equality has been uneven distributed across region and education levels. In 2019, fewer than 90 girls were enrolled for every 100 boys in 4% of countries at primary level, 9% of countries in lower secondary, 15% of countries in upper secondary, and 21% of countries in tertiary education. And gender parity is just on average. Heterogeneity is huge. And girls and women are still underrepresented in STEM. The share of women in engineering and ICT fields of study is below 25% in more than 2/3 of countries. And there are subjects that are still male-dominated, which implies that women and girls are prevented to achieve the same career and earning opportunity than boys or men. Stereotypes and gender bias are very pervasive in textbook and learning materials. Girls are not only very often not represented in images and text in textbook, but also they are depicted in traditional roles, which can strengthen gender roles and stereotypes. Schools are also the arena of violence for girls and women. Very often, girls are more likely to experience verbal and sexual harassment and also cyber bullying. And also, the distribution of power, an equal distribution of power between men and women, means that very many women are still marrying early and having babies very early too, which are huge obstacle to achieving universal secondary education. And even if there is a huge feminization of the teacher profession, women are still very rare in educational leadership and management position. In 48 middle and high income countries, there was a 20 percentage points gender gap between the probability of achieving a teacher position for men and women. We know very well that a shift to inclusion is not easy, and that's why it is important to foster policy dialogue and learn from peers, as we are doing here today. And for this reason, we have developed some tools that can help to foster these processes. Please go there and look at them and help us to disseminate the messages of the report. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Anna Cristina, for a very informative and interesting talk. Frances and Cathy, any immediate comments, thoughts, reflections on this? Cathy?
Yes, the concepts of inclusion and exclusion seem to me really central here. And there's both the numerological demographic, how many women are being educated. There's also the whole range of judgment and evaluation. I was involved in a project for several years where we looked at many studies of how gender exclusion works in higher education. And many of them were studies where the same data was sent out to many, many people, some with a male name attached, some with a female name, and citation, whether articles were reviewed, whether articles were quoted, everything varied depending on whether it was a female or a male name attached, as much as 30 to 50% more likely for citation, review, acceptance. And that happened whether it was admissions, student evaluations, peer-reviewed articles, awards. It was quite depressing. And for me, one of the things that really needs our educational focus, it's almost as bad when women are making the judgments as when men are making the judgments. So we absorb those cultural norms and also pass them on ourselves.
Thank you. Frances, any comments?
Well, I can really only speak to higher education, but what Anna Cristina says is just such a shame that half the world's population that can contribute to solving all the tremendous problems that we're facing aren't getting their full chance to do so. And this is particularly true in STEM, where we are going to have to solve some enormous problems, and women are very good at that. So I support in any possible way the inclusion and the encouragement of women to go into STEM. And I'd just like to make an interesting point. All three women who won Nobel Prizes in the sciences in the last 3 years, all three of us, Jennifer Doudna, Andrea Ghez, and myself, were supported early in our careers by the Packard Foundation with just a grant to support taking risks, right? And it also went to childcare. We were given additional money to make it possible for us to fulfill our family desires, but also do science. We have to support women in order to do that.
Yeah, to make it possible. Yeah. Anna Cristina?
Yeah, I think that issue here is a very important one, and one of the messages of the Global Education Monitoring Report in this respect, and also the gender report, is that inclusion is a process. It takes time, but should be an ambition. And really, the data that we have analyzed in the report have shown that a huge progress has been done in access to education for girls, but we are not yet there, and that's the point. So the question is how we can get there. How can we support this process in all the ways that are possible, because there are so many girls that do not have a chance, even a chance to get into school, not to talk about higher education, secondary education. And then it is pervasive. It's just a question of looking at every single piece and put the piece together. And then do not forget that it is really necessary, and the pandemic is really showing that an integrated approach to gender and to gender in education is really needed.
But how do you, because I guess that this inclusion and exclusion, it's based on structures and old structures. How do you demolish them?
Yeah,
Cathy.
I love Frances's point that the three women who won Nobel Prizes recently were all structurally supported by a foundation that was not only willing to take a risk, but invested material support in things like childcare. Recently in the pandemic, there have been many universities in the United States that are insisting that people come back to teach even when they have children that are at school without any kind of childcare facilities. Well, of course, there's going to be a deficit. These are structural and institutional, not just individual choices we're making.
Yeah.
There shouldn't have to be a choice between having family and having a career. And unfortunately, so many women see that as a choice. And they also don't see how they can contribute to solving these real problems. Now, access to the early education is an absolute prerequisite to that. And I feel terrible for the millions of young girls who don't have that access, because all these brains are being lost for the future.
And in fact, this is really something, these two interventions are really important, because they highlight how much is needed to understand that each single part that is related to gender matters to determine gender equality in education. The pandemic has shown many things. It has shown, for instance, that digital divide is very important, especially for women. This is an emerging concern. Especially, we have seen that in low-income countries, many girls lack telephone, and even when they have telephone, they cannot access internet. So this is a point. But even in high-income countries, there is the issue of childcare and the reconciliation of work and family life. Many women have had to leave their work or taken paid leaves to take over the double burden, as usual, of care and education in addition, because the school closure has been a huge issue, and keeps being a huge issue. So this implies that, however, I don't want to be pessimistic. I think that a lot of progress, we are here to witness that, has been done. Many great women are doing wonderful things. And one thing that is important is really activism, how to bring and to continue to bring these ideas and values forward.
A last question, and perhaps to you, Frances. When from a gender perspective, if you compare your professional scientific environment today to the one that you met when you entered the scientific world once, is there a difference?
Well, there's a quantitative difference and there's a qualitative difference, and it is for the better. We're seeing more women win Nobel Prizes in the sciences, and that's because women started going in full force 20, 30 years ago. As long as we keep encouraging women to do it, they will succeed at the highest levels, because half the brilliant brains belong to women. And so we have to structurally make that possible and encouraging. And women have lots of choices, right? Why would they go into higher education and compete in science when they have so many other options as well? So it has to be attractive. But I'm optimistic we will continue to do that if we make these structural changes that we've been talking about.
Yeah. So we're on the right way. but there are things left to do for sure. Thank you so much, Frances Arnold, Anna Cristina Daggio, and Cathy Davidson. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.